As one nation was being forged in the east with muskets and declarations, another was being born on the vast, open plains. While the United States was created by political revolution, this new Indian culture was created by a biological one, the arrival of the horse and the seemingly endless supply of the buffalo. These two powerful transformations grew in parallel, destined to clash in a bitter conflict for the heart of the Continental conflict that would become the longest war in American history. It is simply called the Indian Wars. The name understates a conflict that became the longest war in United States history, a 60-year struggle that saw the Alamo, the Mexican-American War, and the Civil War come and go. For 6 decades, the Great Plains were defined by ongoing battles, raids, and skirmishes between its nomadic horse warriors and the settlers, traders, and military of the United States. With as many as 20,000 casualties on each side, it was a conflict that made the Wild West a dangerous and violent place. But the origins of these warrior cultures predate the war itself, emerging from the ashes of a much older world. Long before Europeans arrived, North America was home to ancient peoples. Paleo-Indians hunted mammoths and mastodons. They were eventually replaced by the archaic Indians, who lived from 5000 to 1000 BC. These peoples left behind remarkable cave art and hunted the American buffalo by driving herds into kill sites on the eastern Colorado plains. By 1492, the transition to agrarian cultures was nearly complete across the continent, with Indian nations extending across North America. Great civilizations rose. In the east, a network of cities flourished as part of a mound-building culture. In the southwest, the Anasazi and their contemporaries built equally remarkable dwellings. Then, in the historical blink of an eye, they all disappeared. They were replaced by a new configuration of tribes at the start of the 17th century. Many of these tribes then vanished as well, decimated by European diseases, and pushed aside by settlement as Europeans expanded across the continent. The surviving tribes were pushed ever westward into a constantly shrinking and redefined Indian territory. This new warrior culture was created by the intersection of 2 large mammal species. One was the American buffalo, a member of the cattle family indigenous to the continent. Its population before the 1800s was estimated to be somewhere between 60 and 80 million animals. For centuries, Native American tribes had hunted buffalo on foot, but the animal was never their principal source of food and material, unlike deer or elk. That changed with the arrival of the second animal, the horse, brought to the New World by Europeans. The specific breed was critical. The Spanish Iberian Mustang was not a huge grain-fed animal like the horses of northwestern Europe. It was a desert-bred horse, tough and resilient, able to live entirely off grasses and go for long periods without water, making it perfectly suited for the harsh plains. The event that united horse and man was an act of rebellion. In 1680, a massive uprising by the Pueblo Indians broke the hold of their Spanish overlords. As the surviving Spanish fled, they left behind their sheep, their cattle, and thousands of horses. The Pueblo were a sedentary, farming people and had little use for the animals, so they simply let them roam free. This great horse dispersal triggered perhaps the most rapid cultural transformation the planet had ever witnessed. The freed herds multiplied on the vast grasslands. Within 100 years, a number of Native American tribes had completely transformed themselves into nomadic, buffalo-hunting horse cultures. The horse provided the vehicle for a new way of life. The buffalo provided a virtually inexhaustible supply of high-quality protein. This gave the tribes willing to venture onto the plains the chance for rapid population growth. This new culture was mastered by tribes like the Cheyenne, the Sioux, the Comanche, the Kiowa, and the Arapaho, setting the stage for a bitter conflict. The stage for the final act of the Indian Wars was the Great Plains, a vast sea of prairie grass. The short grass prairie offered a huge, unoccupied region for expansion. While it was unfit for permanent settlement, it was ideal for any group that could move easily with the wanderings of the millions of buffalo that grazed there. For the tribes willing to venture onto this landscape, the horse provided the vehicle for movement, and the buffalo provided a virtually inexhaustible supply of high-quality protein. This combination gave them the chance for rapid population growth and the foundation for a new way of life. All of the eventual nomadic tribes that would dominate this region started their journey in the north. 3 came from the eastern shore of this grass sea, and 4 from the western shore. Each nation followed a different path, but all converged to create the formidable horse warrior cultures that would fight for their existence. Unlike the other horse cultures that would later arrive, the Navajo and the Apache moved into their 18th and 19th century homelands long before the Europeans arrived in the 16th century. They were part of a very large subarctic group, generally referred to as the Athabascan-speaking Indians, whose ancestral home covered a large part of Canada's Northwest Territory. Their migration south between 900 and 1400 AD brought them to West Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. Because of their close proximity to the Spanish settlements that came later, they were the first of the native peoples to tame horses. The Navajo, in fact, were the first Indians to attack Europeans using horses, conducting a raid in 1659. Though related, the 2 tribes developed distinct societies. The Navajo were generally more settled than the Apache. They lived in permanent dwellings known as hogans. These remarkable 8-sided buildings were perfectly suited for the desert southwest, remaining warm in the winter and cool in the summer. The Navajo referred to themselves as Dinej, which means the people. Their economy was based on raising livestock, including horses, sheep, and goats, and they were known as excellent weavers. The rugs and blankets they created were highly valued for their craftsmanship. Within their society, women were the most important figures in the family. They owned the land, the homes, and the livestock. Their spiritual life was also rich and structured. One of the most important ceremonies was a healing ritual known as the 9th Way. In this ceremony, shamans, called singers, created sacred and intricate pictures using crushed rock of many colors to heal the sick. These sand paintings were a central part of their spiritual practice. While the Navajo practiced more settled activities like farming, the Apache preferred raiding and hunting. They were a nomadic people, moving seasonally with the antelope, elk, deer, and buffalo. Traveling in small groups or as individual families, they would set up a circular hut known as a wickiup to serve as a temporary home. Each wickiup housed a single family, and from these mobile camps, the Apache would raid the Spanish or other tribes. They captured sheep and goats which they ate, and mustangs which they used primarily as pack horses to carry their goods. Although they numbered less than 5,000, the Apache were among the most warlike of the Indians. They had long-running feuds with almost every other tribe of the southern plains and the desert southwest. In contrast to the Navajo, the Apache formed no formal religious institutions but looked for spirituality in everyday life. The famous Chiricahua leader Geronimo, who was also a healer, explained their way of worship. "We had no churches, no Sabbath of day, no holidays, and yet we worshipped. Sometimes the whole tribe would assemble to sing and pray, sometimes in a smaller number, perhaps only 2 or 3. Sometimes an aged person prayed for all of us." Despite their fighting prowess, neither the Apache nor the Navajo formed any significant military alliances with other tribes. Another nation that would become central to the conflict on the southern plains was the Kiowa. The Kiowa's journey onto the plains began somewhere in the Kootenai region of British Columbia, Canada. From there, they migrated into western Montana in the 1600s. Around 1700, they reached the Yellowstone River area. 10 years later, after acquiring the horse from the Crow tribe, they found a new home in South Dakota's Black Hills. However, their time there was short, as the Cheyenne and the Sioux very quickly drove them from this home. They moved south again, where they fought a bloody war with the Comanche. But by the beginning of the 19th century, the Kiowa forged a strong and lasting military alliance with their former adversary. This powerful Kiowa-Comanche alliance would become the center of the battle for the southern plains. The Kiowa spoke a language believed to be part of the Aztec-Tanoan linguistic style, a language group spoken by many Mexican Indians. Like all the nomadic Indian nations, the twin centers of Kiowa life were hunting and war. Though they were small in numbers, the Kiowa were known for their exceptional bravery, strict military organization, and strong warrior societies. They were also known for their incredible storytelling pictographs. Indeed, they came very close to developing a written language, and much of the history of the Indian Wars comes from their pictographic records, which were drawn on buffalo hides as a kind of yearly calendar. Accompanying the Kiowa on their migration was another, smaller nation later called the Kiowa Apache. Though they were unrelated genealogically to either the Kiowa or the Apache, they shared the cultural traits of the Kiowa and spoke an Athabascan-based language like the Apache, which led to their designation. The Kiowa's main ally, the Comanche, rose from a small band to become the rulers of a vast empire. Their Uto-Aztecan language places the Comanche as part of the Shoshone Nation, which originally occupied a large part of the Great Basin area of Wyoming, Utah, and Nevada. Sometime in the 17th century, a small band of Shoshone from the mountainous region of Wyoming migrated south along the Rocky Mountains. Around the year 1700, they acquired horses, and their world changed forever. By 1720, they had moved into present-day Kansas, and by this time, they had already become the finest horse breeders on the plains. They owned the largest and richest herds of Indian ponies in the West. For the next 150 years, the Comanche would rule over the most expansive Native American empire the continent would ever see. They were master horse warriors who fought and defeated both the Apache and the Spanish. It is said that the Comanche killed more whites than any other Indian tribe. Eventually, they formed powerful military alliances with the Kiowa, the Southern Arapaho, and the Southern Cheyenne. Although the Comanche controlled a large empire that stretched across the southern plains, they were less organized socially than their Kiowa allies. They operated in small, flexible bands of 100 or so warriors. In their ambition and influence, the Comanche rivaled the Spanish conquistadors in wealth and power. And like the Spanish, they were also slave traders and profit seekers. Of all the plains nations, the Comanche were the most open to new ideas, a trait which was perhaps their greatest strength. According to historians Joseph Cash and Gerald Wolfe, the Comanche kept their nation vigorous and far-seeing by bringing in captives from many different groups. But while the Comanche were far-seeing, they also recognized the value of the old traditions, such as using spiderwebs to tell when a storm was approaching, enabling them to use the weather to their advantage during raids or hunts. Allied with the Comanche were the Southern Cheyenne and Arapaho. At one time, both the Cheyenne and Arapaho were part of a large, village-dwelling group of Indian nations known as the Woodland Culture, who lived in the upper Great Lakes region of the United States. Both the Cheyenne and Arapaho were Algonquian-speaking people. Sometime in the 1700s, the Arapaho arrived near the headwaters of the Missouri River, and from there, they pushed south towards the Black Hills. They made a military and economic alliance with the Cheyenne, but they warred with the rest of the Plains tribes, including the Sioux, Pawnee, Comanche, and the Shoshone. In fact, it was by stealing their horses that the Arapaho became a full-fledged horse culture. While the Arapaho were fierce fighters, They were known more for their welcoming ways than their warlike nature. This characteristic stemmed from their form of government, which used consensus to make decisions for the tribe. Usually, consensus was reached among the adult men and some of the elderly women. Unlike the Comanche, who did not allow women to have any authority at all, elderly Arapaho women held authority on religious matters. The Arapaho practiced, and perhaps originated, the sun dance, an annual event that was a grueling test of endurance for its participants, who had to dance and perform rituals for days, often staring into the sun. They also had unique customs, such as placing a newborn child's umbilical cord in a special beaded case and attaching it to the child's cradle as an amulet, which the child would then carry with them wherever they went after learning to walk. The first historical record of their allies, the Cheyenne, was in 1680, when a group encountered the French explorer La Salle in present-day Illinois. Shortly after this encounter, the Cheyenne moved westward, separating from their woodland neighbors. Still living in permanent villages, they farmed along the Missouri River in North and South Dakota during the mid-1700s. But at the century's end, they had lost the corn, as their legend told, and became a true nomadic horse culture. For a brief period, they occupied the Black Hills, only to be pushed out by the Sioux. Perhaps the most important Cheyenne ceremony was the medicine arrow rite, also known as the arrow renewal ceremony. At the end of spring, the Cheyenne arranged their teepees in a crescent with a great medicine lodge at its center. Then, for 4 days, the entire tribe concentrated on renewing the power of their weapons through 4 sacred arrows, which were thought to have supernatural power over men and buffalo. In the 1830s, some Cheyenne and Arapaho gravitated to the trading post at Bent's Fort on the Arkansas River, while others preferred to trade on the Missouri and Platte rivers. The two groups eventually made an informal division. Eventually, the northern Cheyenne and Arapaho would ally themselves with the Sioux in the battle for the northern plains, and the southern Cheyenne and Arapaho would align themselves with the Kiowa and the Comanche in the battle for the southern plains. It has been said that no tribe suffered more during the Indian Wars than the Cheyenne. The tribe that pushed the Cheyenne from the Black Hills, and who often represents the quintessential image of the Plains Indian, was the Sioux, also known as the Lakota, the Dakota, and the Nakota. Originally, they were a woodland Indian tribe that dominated the southern 2/3 of Minnesota, as well as parts of Wisconsin, Iowa, and North and South Dakota. Unlike their neighboring Algonquian-speaking woodland Indians, the Sioux spoke their own language, Sioux. There were 4 ancestral branches of the Sioux: the Santee, the Yankton, the Yanktonai, and the largest and best-known branch, the Teton, also known as the Lakota. It was the Lakota branch that first gained the horse and spread west to the Black Hills and beyond. It was also the Teton branch that became one of the most formidable combatants in the Indian Wars. The Teton had the greatest number of warriors on the plains and inflicted the greatest defeats on the United States cavalry. Aside from their warlike prowess among the Plains nations, the Sioux were known for their kindness, charity, and brotherhood. According to Sioux legend, their way of life was delivered to them by a white buffalo maiden, who came to them bearing a pipe and instructions on how to live. The pipe represented the sacred covenant between the Sioux and the buffalo. Like the Kiowa, the Sioux kept a pictographic record of their history known as the Winter Count. Drawn on buffalo skins, it recorded the most momentous events of the year with a single, evocative picture. 3 other tribes, the Crow, the Blackfeet, and the Ponca, became expert horsemen while living at the edges of the Great Plains. While they participated in the Indian Wars, they never developed a true nomadic lifestyle in the same way as the other nations. By the start of the sustained fighting that culminated in the final phase of the Indian Wars, the Plains Indian tribes had settled into stable territories. By this time, these 7 distinct tribes, while retaining a number of unique features such as language, shared many customs and ways of life derived from becoming a nomadic, buffalo hunting, horse-oriented culture. They were now poised for a final, desperate struggle against a nation determined to control the continent. The unexpected sight of even a lone warrior appearing at the horizon struck fear in the hearts of travelers and cavalry soldiers alike. The paintings on his horse and the number of feathers in his hair showed how powerful a fighter he was. His colorful regalia, including the war paint, indicated he was ready to die in battle. This single warrior might mean hundreds more lay hidden in ambush, or he might just want to trade. To understand the man who inspired such fear and uncertainty, one must first understand the world that created him. The Plains Indian culture was a complex society centered around the family, the hunt, and a deep connection to the natural world. Its structure was visible in everything from their homes to their clothing. The most iconic symbol of this life was the tipi. Its conical shape was both practical and symbolic, a dwelling perfectly engineered for a nomadic existence on the vast, windswept plains. In the Sioux language, the word teepee simply meant dwelling. Before the horse, the size of these dwellings was severely restricted by the limited carrying capacity of the domestic dogs that were used for transportation. A family could only have a home as large as their dogs could haul. That restriction was removed with the arrival of the horse. With powerful ponies to pull heavy loads, the teepee expanded dramatically in size, becoming a spacious home large enough to comfortably house an entire family. Its design was a marvel of practical engineering. It was warm in the brutal winters and cool in the summer heat, and its conical shape made it incredibly stable against the constant prairie winds. Furthermore, it was ingeniously designed to be transported, assembled, and taken down with relative ease, a critical feature for a people constantly on the move. The creation of a teepee was a cooperative effort that clearly defined the roles of men and women. The materials came from the buffalo and the forests. The work of gathering these materials, which involved hunting buffalo for the hides and traveling to find and cut the long, straight lodge poles from pine woods, was done by the men. The rest of the work, from processing the raw materials to final construction, was done by the women. The women tanned the heavy buffalo hides, a laborious process of scraping, treating, and softening the skins until they were pliable. They then skillfully sewed them together to create the large, custom-fitted cover. Women were also solely responsible for putting up the teepees, a task they could complete with remarkable speed. The process was precise. First, 3 poles were used to form a strong tripod base, and then additional poles were added to create the circular frame. When this was done, the heavy cover, which could be made from as many as 20 buffalo hides, was lifted into place and secured at the top. The bottom edge was then pegged firmly to the ground, and the entrance flap was put in place with more wooden pegs. The last 2 poles were kept outside the main structure. They were used to control the smoke flaps at the top, allowing them to be adjusted for wind direction to ensure proper ventilation for the central fire. Just as the tipi was perfectly adapted to the environment, so too was the warrior's clothing. The markings on his clothing indicated which tribe he was from and his prowess as a warrior. The animal skins used to make his garments showed which spirit guides he looked to for personal power. In the summer, the breechclout and simple leggings were perfect for the desert-like heat of the plains. In winter, the heavy fur and tough hide of the buffalo kept him warm in even the most frigid conditions. The buffalo, the all-purpose beast of the plains, was the source of most clothing. Deer and antelope also provided supple skins for garments. As trade with the white man increased, factory-made cloth, blankets, and even boots were used by the Plains Indians. But the buffalo remained the most important source of clothing, right up to the end of the Indian Wars. While a warrior took the utmost care with his appearance when on a raid, it was the women who made all the clothing for the family. They would leave the fur on for winter garments and remove it for summer clothes. While in camp, both men and women dressed simply for freedom of movement. However, on important ceremonial days, they dressed in their finest clothes, with the tribe's distinctive quill and beadwork on full display. In colder weather, or when hunting or on a raiding party to protect his legs, a warrior wore leggings. These were not plain coverings. They were colorful and profusely decorated with paint, bells, shells, quills, or beads. Ceremonial shirts, generally known as war shirts, were extensively decorated and worn during raiding parties. These shirts hung loose and fell well below the waist. The northern tribes, like the Sioux, often had the most vibrantly decorated war shirts, while the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Kiowa painted celestial symbols and other important figures on theirs. An Indian's hair was deemed directly related to the soul, and as such was treated as an adornment. While on a raid, it was often decorated with beads and colors to make it distinctive. Warriors who had earned the high honor of counting coup in battle would wear eagle feathers in their hair. Styles varied by tribe. The Sioux wore their hair loose as a sign of humility. In contrast, some southern and central plains tribes shaved their heads except for a short tuft, and they often then painted the head as well as the face red. In the golden age of the Plains Indian warrior culture, their costumes were among the finest ever made, showing distinctive beauty and personality. This vibrant cultural life was supported by a well-ordered social structure that enabled the 7 major Indian nations to thrive in the harsh environment of the plains and to battle the U.S. military to a standstill for nearly 14 years. It was a social structure organized into groupings within groupings. At its base was the family. The next largest group was the extended family, called a clan. After the clans came camps, or villages. Depending upon the time of year, a village could be as small as 20 or fewer people, or it could be large enough to stretch along a river for 15 miles. Life in the camp revolved around the teepee, and at the center of the teepee was the woman. Women did all the tasks that made the household run. They collected firewood and cooked meals. They gathered suitable roots and fruits. They scraped buffalo and antelope hides. They prepared buffalo meat for drying into jerky. And they made all the clothing, from moccasins to breeches. The women also took care of the children until they were 5 or 6 years of age, often nursing them for the whole time. The man was the head of the household. His job was to hunt and to fight tasks that inevitably took their toll. The dangers of the hunt and constant warfare meant that the mortality rate for men was extremely high, so much so that there were many more women than there were men in a typical clan. The result was that the tribes practiced polygamy. A man who survived the hunt and battle could have several wives, a practice necessary to maintain the population numbers of a clan at a functional level. In this society, clans and bands operated with a great deal of independence, particularly when it came to interactions with other Indians and whites. Because the Indian nations were spread out over such a large area, it was important to have events that brought them together. These events, which took the form of ceremonies, feasts, and dances, served to solidify their tribal and band identity and to plan tribal and band activities, such as warfare or large-scale hunts. This structure provided the strength and resilience that defined the Plains Indian warrior culture. Beneath the structure of Plains Indian society was a deep and abiding spirituality that connected every person to the world around them. To the Plains Indians, everything in the world served a purpose in their lives. The sun, the mountains, the animals, the rivers, and the tree-everything in a warrior's natural environment had a connection to the Creator, and therefore was filled with its own mysterious force. God, or the Great Spirit, was not seen as separate from the earth. This meant that everything was sacred. As a result, the Plains Indians believed that they could, through ritual, directly connect and participate with God by the Spirit. The most important ritual for every individual warrior was the vision quest. These quests were used by warriors to provide them with a direct link to the spiritual world and to aid them in finding supernatural protection. The quest lasted from 2 to 4 days and included fasting, staying awake, and crying for help from the spirits. It was a grueling test of physical and mental endurance, designed to break down the barrier between the physical world and the spiritual one, opening the warrior to a vision that could guide him for the rest of his life. Central to their ceremonies were the dance and the beating of the drum, which were, and still are, of great importance to the Plains Indians. The drum was not just an instrument, it was a sacred object with profound meaning. As one spiritual leader explained, the drum is the centerpiece, like the earth itself. It's like the earth. The earth is round, and everything in it is in that circle, and it touches. When you go in, you're in your mother's womb. The experience within the circle of the drum was one of rebirth. When you crawl out like when you were a baby. You start anew. By 1840, the sweeping economic and social transformation of the Plains Indians from agricultural and sedentary societies to nomadic warrior hunters was complete. The great experiment had concluded. The military alliances among the tribes and their established territories would not change over the next 50 years on the plains. The 7 great warrior nations had found their homes, their allies, and their way of life. This period, poised on the edge of a half-century of conflict, was called the Indian Wars. Ironically, at a time when much of the Western world was experiencing the Industrial Revolution with its factories and machines, the Plains Indian horse culture had completed its own grand experiment in producing a true warrior society. It was a society perfectly adapted to its environment, built on the horse and the buffalo, and grounded in a deep connection to the spiritual world. This was the society that would turn to face the westward expansion of the United States, a nation with a different vision for the continent. The warriors of the plains would nobly fight for their land and way of life in the longest and bloodiest conflict in America's history. The world of master horsemen and buffalo hunters was on a collision course with an expanding United States. In our next episode, the U.S. Army arrives on the plains. We will show you the first military forts built on native land, the peace treaties that were signed and broken, and the first major battles that ignited the longest war in American history. To see the beginning of this epic conflict, subscribe and turn on notifications for the next chapter of this story.